The rope snapped clean through, and Olivia Anderson watched helplessly as 3 months of supplies scattered across the prairie dirt, crates splintering against rocks and precious flour bags splitting open to dust the ground white. She stood there in the harsh June sunlight of 1878, her hands still gripping the wagon handle, staring at the frayed hemp that had finally given out 20 miles from Centralia, Washington, knowing she had no money left to replace it and no way to haul what remained of her belongings without it. Her father had died that winter, leaving her alone on their failing homestead with debts she could not pay and a future that looked as bleak as the cloudless sky above. The land claim was hers now, but land meant nothing without the means to work it. She had sold nearly everything of value to buy seed and supplies for one last attempt at making the farm profitable. And now half of it lay ruined in the dirt because she had tried to stretch that old rope one journey too far. Olivia was 22 years old, with sun-darkened skin and calloused hands that spoke of hard work, her dark blonde hair pulled back in a practical braid that hung down her back. She wore a simple cotton dress that had been mended so many times the original fabric was hard to distinguish from the patches, and boots that had belonged to her father, stuffed with cloth to make them fit. She had his stubborn jaw and her mother's green eyes, and right now those eyes were studying the prairie grass that surrounded her with an intensity that would have surprised anyone who thought her defeated. Her father had taught her to observe, to think, to solve problems with whatever materials were at hand. He had been a practical man, sometimes too practical, unwilling to ask for help even when help might have saved him. Olivia had inherited that independence, but she had also learned from his mistakes. She knew when to bend, when to adapt, when to find another way forward. She knelt in the grass and ran her fingers through the tall stalks, testing their strength, examining their fiber. The prairie grass here grew thick and tough, drought-resistant and hardy, the kind that could cut an unwary hand if grabbed carelessly. She had seen her father weave grass into temporary repairs before, small things, stopgaps, but never anything substantial. Still, the principle was the same. Fiber was fiber. Enough of it, twisted together properly, could bear weight. Olivia spent the next hour gathering grass, cutting it carefully with her father's knife, selecting the longest and strongest stalks she could find. She laid them out in bundles, sorting them by length and thickness, her mind working through the problem methodically. She had watched rope makers in town, seen how they twisted and braided hemp, the way the fibers locked together to create something stronger than any individual strand. She could do this. She had to do this. The sun climbed higher as she worked, sweat beading on her forehead and dampening the back of her dress. She started with a simple 3-strand braid, testing different tensions, different numbers of grass stalks per strand. The first attempts fell apart immediately, too loose, too uneven. She tried again, tighter this time, using more grass, wetting the stalks slightly with water from her canteen to make them more pliable. The fourth attempt held together, a rough cord perhaps 3 feet long, far too short to be useful but proof that the concept could work. She tested its strength, pulling hard, and it held. She pulled harder, and one section began to fray but did not break completely. It was not perfect, but it was something. She kept working, improving her technique with each attempt, learning the right amount of moisture, the right tightness, the right ratio of thick stalks to thin. Her fingers began to ache, then to bleed slightly from small cuts where the sharp edges of the grass caught her skin, but she did not stop. By midday, she had created several usable lengths of grass rope, each one stronger than the last, and she was beginning to understand the rhythm of it, the way the work became almost meditative once her hands learned the pattern. That was when she heard the hoofbeats. Olivia looked up, shading her eyes against the sun, and saw a rider approaching from the east. He was still distant, but she could make out a dark hat, a horse that moved with the easy gait of an animal well cared for, and the confident posture of someone who spent more time in the saddle than on the ground. She stood slowly, brushing grass from her skirt, suddenly aware of how she must look, alone on the prairie with her broken wagon and her scattered supplies. The rider drew closer, and Olivia could see him more clearly now. He was young, perhaps in his mid-20s, with broad shoulders and the lean build of a working cowboy. He wore range clothes, practical and well-worn, and there was a rope coiled at his saddle, a real rope, professionally made. As he approached, he slowed his horse to a walk, then stopped a respectful distance away. "Madam," he said, touching the brim of his hat. His voice was deep and carried a slight accent she could not quite place, something that suggested he had traveled far before settling in this territory. "Looks like you have had some trouble." "My rope broke," Olivia said simply, seeing no point in pretending otherwise. "I am managing." The cowboy dismounted, moving with the easy grace of someone comfortable in his own body. He was handsome in a rough way, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, brown eyes that seemed kind, and a strong jaw shadowed with stubble. His name was Miles Northwood, though she did not know that yet, and he had been riding back to the ranch where he worked after delivering a message to a neighboring spread. Miles looked at the broken wagon, the scattered supplies, and then at the pile of grass rope Olivia had created. His eyes widened slightly, and he walked over to examine her work, picking up one of the longer pieces and testing it with his hands. He pulled, twisted it, examined the construction with the careful attention of someone who understood rope and its uses. "You made this?" he asked, and there was genuine amazement in his voice. "From prairie grass." "I could not buy new rope," Olivia said, a hint of defensiveness in her tone. "So I am replacing it with what I have." Miles continued to examine the grass rope, running it through his fingers, testing different sections. "This is remarkable," he said finally. "I have never seen anything like this. The weave is tight, the tension is even. How did you learn to do this?" "I did not learn," Olivia admitted. "I figured it out. It is not that complicated if you understand the principles." Miles looked at her then, really looked at her, and Olivia felt suddenly self-conscious under his gaze. She knew she was not pretty in the conventional sense, not like the town girls with their soft hands and fancy dresses. She was too thin, too weathered, too practical. But Miles was not looking at her with pity or condescension. He was looking at her with respect, with curiosity, with something that might have been admiration. "How much rope do you need?" he asked. "At least 20 feet to haul the wagon properly," Olivia said. "More would be better, but I can make do with 20. Miles glanced at the sun, calculating time, then looked back at the scattered supplies. "It will take you hours to make that much, and you will want to gather what you can salvage before the heat of the day ruins more of your goods. Let me help." Olivia stiffened. "I do not need charity." "Not charity," Miles said quickly. "Help. There is a difference. Besides, I want to learn how you do this. If prairie grass can be made into working rope, that is knowledge worth having." There was logic in what he said, and Olivia was practical enough to recognize it. She nodded slowly. "All right, but I will teach you properly. No sense doing it halfway." Miles grinned, a quick flash of warmth that transformed his serious face into something almost boyish. "Yes, madam." They worked side by side for the next several hours, and Olivia found herself surprised by how quickly Miles learned. He had good hands, strong but dexterous, and he paid attention to the details she explained. He did not make assumptions or try to take over, just followed her instructions and asked intelligent questions when something was unclear. They fell into an easy rhythm, cutting grass, preparing it, braiding it into rope. As they worked, they talked. Miles told her about the ranch where he worked, a large spread owned by a man named Henderson who raised cattle and horses. He had been there for 3 years, having come west from Missouri after his parents died of fever. He had a younger sister back east, married now with children of her own, but he preferred the open country to city life. There was something about the land here, he said, that made a man feel like he could breathe. Olivia told him about her father, about the homestead, about the struggle to make something work in soil that fought you every step of the way. She did not mention the debts, not yet, but Miles seemed to understand that life had not been easy. He did not offer empty sympathy, just listened and nodded and kept working. By late afternoon, they had created enough grass rope to repair the wagon harness and secure the remaining supplies. Miles helped her gather what could be saved, loading the unbroken crates and bags back into the wagon, his strength making quick work of heavy lifting that would have taken Olivia twice as long alone. The flour was a loss, and several other items were damaged beyond use, but enough remained to make the trip worthwhile. When they finished, Miles stepped back and examined the grass rope harness with a critical eye. "It should hold," he said, "at least as far as Centralia. But you will want to replace it with proper rope as soon as you can afford it." "I know," Olivia said. She hesitated, then added, "Thank you for your help." "No need for thanks," Miles said, "though I meant what I said. What you did here, making rope from grass, that is impressive. Most people would have just sat down and given up." "Giving up never solved anything," Olivia said. It was something her father used to say, and hearing the words come out of her own mouth made her chest tighten with grief she thought she had buried. Miles must have seen something in her face because his expression softened. "You heading straight back to your place?" "Yes. I need to get these supplies stored before nightfall. Mind if I ride along, just to make sure that grass rope holds?" "Would hate for you to have another breakdown out here alone." Olivia knew she should refuse, should insist she could manage on her own, but the truth was that the company would be welcome. The prairie felt less empty with someone else there, and Miles had proven himself helpful without being overbearing. She nodded. "All right." They set out as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber. Miles rode alongside the wagon, keeping his horse to an easy walk that matched the pace of Olivia's team. The grass rope harness held, bearing the weight of the supplies without apparent strain, and Olivia felt a small surge of satisfaction at seeing her improvised solution actually work. They talked more as they traveled, the conversation flowing more easily now that they had worked together. Miles asked about farming, genuinely curious about the techniques and challenges, and Olivia found herself explaining crop rotation and irrigation with more enthusiasm than she had felt in months. In turn, Miles talked about cattle drives and horse breaking, about long nights under the stars and the particular satisfaction of training a green colt into a reliable mount. The homestead came into view as the sun touched the horizon, a small cabin with a barn and a few outbuildings, all of it looking worn and tired in the fading light. Olivia felt a familiar mixture of affection and despair at the sight. This was home, the place where she had grown up, where her father was buried on the hill behind the house. But it was also a constant reminder of everything she was trying and failing to achieve. Miles helped her unload the wagon, carrying supplies into the cabin and the barn without being asked. Olivia lit a lamp as the last light faded, and they worked in its warm glow, storing everything properly, making sure nothing would spoil overnight. When they finished, Miles stood in the doorway of the cabin, clearly hesitant to leave but unsure whether he should stay. "It is getting dark," Olivia said. "You are welcome to sleep in the barn and head back in the morning, safer than riding at night." "I would appreciate that," Miles said, "if it is no trouble." "No trouble. There is hay in the loft and it is dry. I will bring you some supper." She made a simple meal from her dwindling supplies, beans and bread and coffee, and carried it out to the barn where Miles had settled his horse and laid out his bedroll. They ate together sitting on hay bales, the comfortable silence of two people who had spent a hard day working side by side. "You really think you can make this place work?" Miles asked eventually, gesturing at the homestead around them. "I have to," Olivia said simply. "It is all I have." Miles nodded slowly. "If you ever need help, the Henderson Ranch is about 8 miles northeast of Centralia. Anyone in town can give you directions. I mean that. What you did today, making rope from nothing, that is the kind of resourcefulness that deserves to succeed." Olivia felt warmth spread through her chest at his words, a feeling she had not experienced in a long time. She looked at Miles in the lamplight and saw sincerity in his face, a genuine offer of friendship or maybe something more. The thought both frightened and excited her. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I will remember that." She left him then, walking back to the cabin through the darkness, aware of his eyes following her until she closed the door. Inside, she leaned against the rough wood and let herself feel, really feel, for the first time since her father died. The loneliness, the fear, the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. And underneath it all, a small flutter of something that might have been attraction, the memory of strong hands helping her, kind eyes looking at her with respect. She barely knew Miles Northwood, but he had appeared when she needed help most, and he had not made her feel weak for needing it. That was worth something. That was worth a lot. The next morning she woke early, as she always did, and went out to find Miles already up and tending to his horse. The dawn light was soft and pink, and he looked up as she approached, smiling that quick grin that made him look younger. "Morning," he said. "I was just about to head out. Did not want to leave without saying goodbye." "Stay for breakfast," Olivia said, surprising herself with how much she wanted him to stay. "It is the least I can do after yesterday." Miles agreed, and they ate together in the cabin, a meal of eggs from Olivia's few chickens and the last of the bread. They talked about nothing important, small observations about the weather and the land, but the conversation felt significant somehow, like they were learning each other's rhythms, finding common ground. When Miles finally did leave, riding off toward the northeast, Olivia stood in her doorway and watched until he disappeared over a rise. Then she turned back to her work, to the endless list of tasks that kept the homestead barely functional. But she found herself working with more energy than she had felt in weeks. The grass rope harness still hung on the wagon, a reminder of what she could accomplish when she refused to give up, and more than that, a tangible connection to the cowboy who had been amazed by what she had made. She did not expect to see Miles again soon, if ever. Men like him had their own lives, their own work, and yesterday had been a chance encounter on the prairie. Nothing more. But 3 days later, as she was repairing the chicken coop, she heard hoofbeats and looked up to see a familiar figure riding toward her homestead. Miles dismounted before he reached the cabin, leading his horse the last distance as if to give her time to prepare for his arrival. He was carrying something, a bundle wrapped in cloth, and there was a slight uncertainty in his posture that had not been there before. "I was passing through," he said, which was obviously not true given that her homestead was not on the way to anywhere. "Thought I would check on that grass rope, make sure it is still holding." Olivia felt her heart beat faster, a traitorous excitement she tried to suppress. "It is holding fine," she said, gesturing toward the wagon. The grass rope was indeed still intact, darkened slightly from use but showing no signs of serious wear. Miles examined it carefully, professionally, then nodded his approval. "That is good work. Really good work." He held out the bundle he was carrying. "I brought you this. I was in Centralia yesterday and thought you might need it." Olivia unwrapped the cloth and found a coil of new hemp rope, professionally made, strong and clean. It was not an inexpensive item, and she felt her throat tighten at the gesture. "I cannot accept this," she said. "It is too much." "It is practical," Miles said firmly. "Your grass rope is impressive, but it will not last forever. You need proper rope for the long term. Consider it payment for teaching me how to make rope from prairie grass. That knowledge is valuable." Olivia wanted to refuse, to maintain her independence, but she was practical enough to recognize that pride was a luxury she could not afford. She needed the rope, and Miles was offering it in a way that did not make her feel like a charity case. She nodded slowly. "Thank you, truly." They stood there for a moment, the rope between them, and Olivia saw something in Miles's eyes that made her breath catch. He had not come just to check on the rope. He had come to see her. "Would you like some coffee?" she asked, the words coming out before she could second-guess them. "I would," Miles said, and his smile was warm and genuine. They sat on the porch of the cabin, drinking coffee and talking as the morning warmed around them. Miles told her more about the ranch, about Henderson's plans to expand the herd, about the other cowboys who worked there, rough men but mostly decent once you got to know them. Olivia talked about her plans for the homestead, the crops she wanted to try, the repairs that needed doing before winter came. It became a pattern over the following weeks. Miles would ride out every few days, always with some excuse, checking on something or passing through on ranch business, but always staying longer than necessary, always finding reasons to help with whatever work needed doing. He repaired the barn roof that had been leaking for months. He helped her build a better fence for the chickens. He brought news from town and supplies he claimed were extras from the ranch, though Olivia suspected he was buying them himself. She should have told him to stop, should have maintained her independence, but she found herself looking forward to his visits with an intensity that frightened her. He made the work easier, yes, but more than that, he made the loneliness bearable. When Miles was there, the homestead felt less like a prison and more like a home. They did not speak about what was happening between them, the growing connection that was becoming harder to ignore. They worked side by side, their hands occasionally brushing as they passed tools or lifted heavy objects, and every touch sent sparks through Olivia's body that she tried to pretend she did not feel. Miles's eyes followed her when he thought she was not looking, and she found herself watching him in return, noticing the strength in his arms, the way he moved, the sound of his laugh when she said something that amused him. It was during a hot day in late July when things changed. They were working together to dig a new irrigation ditch, back-breaking work under the relentless sun, and Olivia straightened to wipe sweat from her forehead. She looked at Miles, who was covered in dirt and sweat himself, and saw him watching her with an expression so intense it made her heart stop. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "I have been thinking," Miles said slowly, setting down his shovel, "about what I want, about my future." Olivia felt her pulse quicken. "And what do you want?" Miles took a step toward her, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "I want to wake up knowing I will see you that day. I want to help you make this homestead everything it could be. I want to stop pretending I am just passing through, when we both know I am riding 8 miles out of my way just to be near you." The honesty in his voice made Olivia's throat tight. She had built walls around herself after her father died, convinced she had to handle everything alone. But Miles was dismantling those walls brick by brick simply by showing up, by caring, by seeing value in her that she had stopped seeing in herself. "I am not an easy person to care about," she said quietly. "I am stubborn and proud, and I do not know how to ask for help." "I know," Miles said, and there was warmth in his voice. "I do not need easy, I need real, and you are the most real person I have ever met." He reached out and took her hand, his fingers rough and calloused against hers, and Olivia felt something break open inside her chest, a flood of feelings she had been holding back for weeks. She stepped closer, and Miles wrapped his arms around her, pulling her against him, and she let herself be held, let herself lean on someone else's strength for the first time since her father died. They stood like that for a long moment, hearts beating against each other, and when Miles pulled back just enough to look at her face, Olivia saw the question in his eyes. She answered by rising on her toes and kissing him, tentative at first, then deeper as he responded, his hands sliding into her hair, her arms wrapping around his neck. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Miles rested his forehead against hers. "I want to court you properly," he said. "I want everyone to know that I am trying to win your hand. Is that something you would want?" "Yes," Olivia whispered, the word coming easily, naturally, because it was the truth. From that day forward, Miles's visits became official. He spoke to Henderson, the ranch owner, and arranged to have his work scheduled so he could spend time at Olivia's homestead. He brought small gifts, wildflowers picked on his rides, a new pair of work gloves when he noticed hers were falling apart, a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy. They worked together during the day and sat together in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing, learning each other's stories, building something solid and real. Olivia found herself softening in ways she had not expected. She learned to accept help without feeling weak, to share her burdens without feeling like she was failing. Miles never made her feel less capable, never treated her resourcefulness as anything but admirable. When she showed him other things she had made or fixed with improvised materials, he was genuinely impressed, asking questions about her methods, learning from her even as he shared his own knowledge of ranching and horses. The homestead began to change under their combined efforts. The irrigation ditch brought water to fields that had been too dry to plant effectively. New fences went up, straight and strong. The cabin got repairs it had needed for years, a new door, window frames that actually shut properly, a roof that did not leak. The work was still hard, the challenges still real, but with two people sharing the load, it felt possible in a way it had not before. In late August, Miles arrived one evening with news. Henderson had offered him a piece of land adjacent to the homestead, a wedding gift if Miles and Olivia chose to marry. It was good grazing land, enough to run cattle or horses, and combined with Olivia's claim, it would make a respectable spread. "I have not asked you properly yet," Miles said, his voice nervous in a way Olivia had never heard before. "And I do not want you to think I am assuming anything. But if you would consider becoming my wife, we could build something here, together. A real ranch, a real home. Not because you need me to survive, but because we work well together. Because I love you." The last words came out quietly, almost shy, and Olivia felt tears prick her eyes. She had not cried since her father's funeral, had not allowed herself that weakness, but these were different tears, born of happiness rather than grief. "I love you too," she said, and watched joy spread across Miles's face like sunrise. "Yes, I will marry you." Miles pulled a ring from his pocket, a simple silver band that he said had belonged to his mother. It fit Olivia's finger perfectly, and when he slipped it on, she felt the weight of it like a promise, solid and real and full of possibility. They were married in September, in the small church in Centralia with Henderson and his wife as witnesses, along with a handful of other ranchers and townspeople who had come to know them both. Olivia wore a dress borrowed from Henderson's wife, altered to fit, and Miles wore his best clothes, his hair slicked back, looking nervous and proud and so handsome it made her heart ache. The ceremony was simple, the words traditional, but when Miles said his vows, his voice was steady and sure, and when Olivia said hers, she meant every word. They were promising to build a life together, to face whatever challenges came with combined strength, to be partners in the truest sense. The celebration afterward was held at the Henderson Ranch, a party that lasted into the evening with food and music and dancing. Olivia, who had not danced since she was a girl, let Miles lead her through simple steps while the other guests clapped and cheered. She laughed more that night than she had in years, surrounded by people who genuinely seemed happy for them, feeling like maybe, just maybe, she belonged somewhere again. They rode back to the homestead together as the stars came out, Miles's horse tied to the wagon, sitting side by side on the bench. The night was cool and clear, and Olivia leaned against her husband, still getting used to that word, feeling his warmth and solidity and presence. "Are you happy?" Miles asked quietly. "I am," Olivia said, and realized it was true. She was happy, genuinely happy in a way she had not been since before her father got sick. The fear was still there, the uncertainty about the future, but it was manageable now, shared between two people instead of crushing one. The homestead looked different when they arrived, and Olivia realized Miles must have arranged something with the ranch hands because there were lanterns lit on the porch, flowers in jars, small touches that made the worn cabin look almost festive. He had planned this, had wanted their first night as husband and wife to be special, and the thoughtfulness of it made Olivia fall in love with him all over again. That night, they truly became husband and wife, coming together with tenderness and passion, learning each other's bodies the way they had learned each other's minds over the summer. Miles was gentle with her, patient, making sure she felt safe and cherished, and when Olivia finally fell asleep in his arms, she felt more at peace than she had in years. The following months brought new rhythms to their lives. Miles moved his belongings to the homestead, and they began the work of combining their resources and building their combined ranch. Henderson had been true to his word about the land, and they filed the proper claims to make it official. They sold some of Olivia's less productive fields and used the money to buy cattle, starting small but with room to grow. The grass rope that had brought them together hung in the barn, a reminder of where they had started. Olivia sometimes looked at it and marveled at how much had changed since that day on the prairie when her regular rope snapped. If that had not happened, if she had not been forced to improvise, Miles might have ridden past without stopping, and they might never have met. Winter came, and they faced it together, the two of them snug in the cabin while snow piled outside. Miles taught Olivia to play cards during the long evenings, and she read to him from the poetry book he had given her, finding that she enjoyed his reactions to the verses almost as much as the words themselves. They planned for spring, discussing crops and cattle, where to build new structures, how to make the most of their combined land. In the spring, Olivia discovered she was pregnant. She told Miles on a morning in April when the first green shoots were pushing through the soil, and she watched his face transform from surprise to wonder to pure joy. He wrapped her in his arms, careful not to hold too tight, and she felt him trembling slightly. "We are going to have a baby," he said, as if testing the words, making them real. "We are," Olivia confirmed, her own voice full of wonder. Miles became even more protective after that, trying to take on more of the heavy work, but Olivia insisted on maintaining her share. She was pregnant, not fragile, and she knew her body well enough to recognize its limits. They found a new balance, with Miles handling the most strenuous tasks while Olivia focused on work that required precision more than strength. The baby was born in January of 1880, during a cold snap that had Miles terrified something would go wrong. But Olivia's labor, while long and painful, was uncomplicated, and the midwife from Centralia saw both mother and child through safely. When Miles finally got to hold his son, a red-faced, squalling infant with a surprising amount of dark hair, he cried unashamedly, tears running down his face as he looked at Olivia with awe. "He is perfect," Miles whispered. "You are perfect. I do not know what I did to deserve this." They named him James after Miles's father, and he became the center of their world. Olivia discovered depths of love she had not known existed, a fierce protectiveness mixed with wonder at every small development, every new expression, every milestone. Miles was a devoted father, getting up in the night to help with the baby, singing rough lullabies in his deep voice, holding James for hours just to watch him sleep. The ranch continued to grow around them. They built a proper bunkhouse for the 2 ranch hands they had hired to help with the expanding cattle herd. They added rooms to the cabin, transforming it from a rough homestead into a real house, something that could shelter a growing family. The fields produced good yields, and the cattle thrived on the prairie grass that had once been the source of improvised rope. Life was not without its challenges. There were hard seasons, times when money was tight, when they had to make difficult decisions about where to allocate limited resources. But they faced everything together, talking through problems, combining Olivia's resourcefulness with Miles's steady pragmatism to find solutions. The strength of their partnership, built on mutual respect and genuine affection, carried them through. When James was 2 years old, Olivia became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was harder, and there were moments when she felt overwhelmed by fatigue and the demands of caring for a toddler while growing another child. But Miles was there, taking James on long rides to give her rest, hiring a woman from town to help with household tasks when the work became too much, making sure Olivia knew she did not have to be strong every moment of every day. Their daughter was born in the summer of 1882, a smaller baby than James had been but with the same healthy lungs. They named her Sarah, after Olivia's mother, and she had her mother's green eyes and her father's dark hair. Miles was just as smitten with her as he had been with James, cradling his tiny daughter with the same careful wonder, making promises to protect her and cherish her, and make sure she grew up knowing she could be anything she wanted to be. The years passed in the way that they do when life is full, each season bringing its own work and rewards. James grew into a curious, energetic boy who followed his father everywhere, learning about horses and cattle almost before he could properly walk. Sarah was quieter but no less determined, with a stubborn streak that reminded everyone of her mother. They both grew up knowing the value of hard work, seeing their parents work side by side every day, understanding that the ranch they lived on was built through determination and love. Olivia sometimes thought about the woman she had been when Miles first found her on the prairie, alone and desperate, making rope from grass because she had no other option. That woman had been strong, yes, but she had also been isolated, convinced she had to face everything alone. The woman she had become was stronger still, because she had learned that strength could be shared, that accepting help was not weakness, that building something with another person created possibilities that could never exist in solitude. The grass rope had long since rotted away, but they had saved a piece of it, kept in a small box in their bedroom as a reminder. Sometimes Olivia would take it out and hold it, remembering that day, the heat and the frustration and the determination that had led her to improvise a solution from the materials at hand. And then she would look at the life she and Miles had built together, at their children and their ranch, and the future that stretched before them full of promise. And she would marvel at how one moment of resourcefulness had led to everything that mattered. In the spring of 1885, when the ranch was thriving and the children were old enough to be truly helpful with age-appropriate tasks, Miles suggested they host a gathering for their neighbors and friends. It had been years since they had taken time to simply celebrate what they had accomplished, and he wanted to share their success with the community that had supported them. The party was held on a Saturday in May, with tables set up outside and food contributed by everyone who came. Henderson was there with his wife, now elderly but still sharp, telling anyone who would listen that he had known from the start that Miles and Olivia would make something special of their combined land. The ranch hands, current and former, came with their families. Townspeople from Centralia made the trip, bringing children who played with James and Sarah in the fields. As Olivia looked around at the gathering, at the people eating and talking and laughing on land that had once seemed like more burden than blessing, she felt Miles's arm slip around her waist. She leaned into him, comfortable after years of marriage, and he kissed the top of her head. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I am thinking about rope," Olivia said, and laughed at Miles's confused expression. "About how I made rope from prairie grass because I had no other choice, and how you were amazed by it, and how that moment led to all of this." Miles smiled, understanding as he always did. "I was amazed," he said. "I am still amazed. Every day I wake up next to you, I am amazed that you chose me, that we built this together." "We did build it together," Olivia said softly. "That is the important part, not what I did alone, but what we did together." They stood like that for a while, watching their children play, watching their friends and neighbors enjoy the fruits of years of hard work. The sun was warm, the grass was green, and the future felt as solid and real as the ground beneath their feet. As the party continued into the evening, with music starting up and couples beginning to dance, Miles led Olivia into the open space that had become a makeshift dance floor. They moved together easily, long practice making up for any lack of formal training, and Olivia rested her head against Miles's shoulder, feeling his heartbeat steady and strong beneath her ear. "I love you," she said, the words coming easily after years of saying them, but no less meaningful for their familiarity. "I love you too," Miles replied, his voice warm and certain. "Always." The music played on, and they danced beneath the stars, surrounded by the life they had created together from determination and improvisation and love. The prairie stretched around them, endless and full of possibility, and Olivia knew with complete certainty that whatever challenges the future held, they would face them the way they had faced everything else together, building solutions from whatever materials were at hand, amazed by what they could create when they combined their strengths. Years continued to pass, each one adding new layers to their life together. The ranch expanded steadily, never growing enormous but becoming solidly prosperous, enough to support their family comfortably and employ several permanent hands. James grew into a capable young man who shared his father's way with horses and his mother's practical problem-solving approach. By the time he was 16, he was essentially running the daily operations of the horse training side of the business, freeing Miles to focus on the cattle operation. Sarah, meanwhile, proved to have an unexpected gift for numbers and organization. By the age of 14, she was managing the ranch's books with a precision that impressed even the banker in Centralia. She also inherited her mother's resourcefulness, often finding creative solutions to problems that stumped everyone else. There was an incident with a broken wagon wheel when Sarah was 12 where she improvised a temporary repair using techniques her mother had taught her. And Olivia had felt a fierce pride watching her daughter refuse to be defeated by circumstances. In 1890, when James was 10 and Sarah was 8, Olivia discovered she was pregnant once more. The pregnancy was a surprise, as she had assumed her childbearing years were behind her, but both she and Miles welcomed the news with joy. Their third child, a son they named Daniel, was born in early 1891, and his arrival brought new energy to the household. James and Sarah doted on their baby brother, and Miles joked that Daniel would be impossibly spoiled with so many people wanting to hold him and play with him. The community around Centralia grew and changed over the years. The railroad came through in 1888, bringing new economic opportunities, but also new challenges as outside interests began to eye the good grazing land with increasing interest. Miles and Olivia worked with Henderson and other established ranchers to form an association that could negotiate better prices for cattle and present a united front against predatory buyers. It was during one of these association meetings that Olivia first spoke publicly about her philosophy of resourcefulness and adaptation. A younger rancher was complaining about the cost of supplies, about how impossible it was to afford everything needed to run a successful operation, and Olivia had listened for a while before speaking up. "When I first came to this land," she said, her voice calm but carrying clearly through the room, "I could not afford rope. My old rope broke 20 miles from town, and I had no money to replace it. I could have sat down and admitted defeat, or I could have found another way. I chose to make rope from prairie grass." The room had gone quiet, everyone listening. "It was not perfect rope," Olivia continued. "It did not last as long as hemp, but it held long enough to get me home, and it taught me something important. There is almost always another way if you are willing to look for it, to experiment, to use what you have instead of focusing on what you lack. That is how you survive out here. That is how you build something that lasts." There had been a moment of silence, and then Miles had started applauding, pride evident on his face, and the rest of the room had joined in. After the meeting, several ranchers approached Olivia to ask for her advice on various problems, and she found herself becoming an unofficial consultant for people struggling with the practical challenges of frontier life. It was a role she had never sought, but found surprisingly satisfying. She liked helping people find solutions, liked sharing the knowledge she had accumulated through years of necessity and experimentation. Miles encouraged her, proud of his wife's growing reputation, never threatened by her expertise or the respect she commanded in the community. As the 1890s progressed, the ranch became more than just a cattle and horse operation. They began hosting young people who wanted to learn ranching, offering apprenticeships that taught practical skills. James took the lead on this program, proving to be a patient and effective teacher despite his youth. Sarah began keeping detailed records of their methods and results, creating a body of knowledge that could be shared and replicated. Daniel grew up surrounded by this industrious, innovative atmosphere, and from an early age showed signs of inheriting both his mother's resourcefulness and his father's steady nature. He was a bright, curious child, always asking questions, always wanting to understand how things worked. Miles and Olivia made sure all their children understood that education was valuable, that thinking was as important as physical work, that innovation and tradition both had their place. In 1895, Henderson passed away at the age of 78, leaving his ranch to his son, but gifting Miles and Olivia a substantial piece of land that connected their holdings in a way that made the operation much more efficient. It was a final gesture of gratitude and respect from a man who had given Miles his first real chance in this country, and who had supported their marriage when it might have been easier to keep a good cowboy working solely for him. The funeral was large, attended by seemingly everyone who had ever done business with Henderson, and Miles spoke movingly about the old rancher's integrity and generosity. Afterward, as they stood at Henderson's grave, Miles took Olivia's hand and squeezed it gently. "He believed in us from the beginning," Miles said quietly. "Before we even knew what we were building, he saw it." "He was a good man," Olivia agreed. "We were lucky to know him." They walked back to their wagon together, their children waiting for them, and Olivia thought about how many people had contributed to their success over the years. Henderson, certainly, but also the townspeople who had extended credit when times were tight, the ranch hands who had worked hard and honestly, the neighbors who had helped during emergencies, the community that had accepted them and supported them. No one built anything alone, not really, even if they had to start with nothing but prairie grass and determination. The turn of the century came, bringing with it a sense of new possibilities and changes. James was 20 by then, and there was talk of him marrying the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a sensible young woman named Catherine, who shared his love of horses and his practical nature. Sarah was 18 and had received an offer to work at the bank in Centralia, her skill with numbers having impressed the bank manager during several business interactions. Miles and Olivia discussed these changes at length, lying in bed at night after the children were asleep, talking about how their roles were shifting from active managers to advisors, how the ranch they had built was becoming something that would outlast them, passing to the next generation. "Does it frighten you?" Olivia asked one night. Getting older, letting go of control. Miles was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Not frightened," he said finally. "A little sad maybe to see time passing so quickly, but mostly proud. We built something good, Olivia. Our children are capable and decent people. The ranch is prosperous. We have friends and respect in the community. That is more than most people can say. It is more than I ever imagined when you found me on the prairie making rope from grass," Olivia said softly. Miles pulled her closer, his arm warm around her shoulders. "I knew that day," he said. "When I saw what you had done, the ingenuity and determination it took, I knew you were someone special. I just had to convince you to give me a chance." "You did more than that," Olivia said. "You showed me that I did not have to do everything alone. That was the greater gift." They lay together in comfortable silence, years of marriage making words less necessary, presence more important. Outside, the prairie wind moved through the grass, the same wind that had been there when Olivia first twisted grass into rope, when Miles first rode up to help a stranger, when they first admitted their feelings, when they danced at their wedding, when their children were born. The land remained constant even as everything on it changed and grew. James married Catherine in the spring of 1901, in the same church where Miles and Olivia had married more than 20 years earlier. It was a joyful celebration, two families joining, two young people clearly in love starting their life together. Miles gave a toast at the reception that made Olivia cry, talking about marriage as partnership, about working together to build something greater than either person could create alone. Later that year, Sarah announced she was engaged to the assistant bank manager, a young man named Robert who was smart and ambitious, but also kind, treating Sarah with the respect and equality her parents had always modeled. Her wedding was planned for the following spring, and Olivia threw herself into preparations, enjoying the chance to fuss over her daughter in a way that daily ranch life rarely permitted. Daniel, now 10 years old, was showing signs of potentially being the most intellectual of their children. He loved books and was constantly asking questions about science and history and how things worked. Miles and Olivia enrolled him in the best school available in Centralia, making the trip to take him and pick him up each day, determined that he would have educational opportunities they had never had. As 1902 began, with James and Catherine settled in a house they had built on the ranch property, and Sarah planning her wedding, Olivia found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point. She was 46 years old now, her hands more weathered than ever, her face lined from years in the sun, but she felt stronger and more content than she had at 22. She took to walking in the mornings before the household woke, just her and the prairie and the slowly brightening sky. One morning in February, she walked to the spot where she estimated she had been when her rope broke all those years ago, when Miles had found her making improvised rope from grass. It was impossible to know if it was the exact location, but it was close enough. The grass looked the same as it had then, tall and tough and resilient. Olivia knelt and cut some stalks with the small knife she still carried, and then, sitting on the cold ground with the dawn light growing around her, she braided them together, her hands remembering the motions even after so many years. The result was rough but functional, a small length of grass rope, and she held it up to examine it in the growing light. Still got the touch. Olivia turned to find Miles riding up, his horse's breath steaming in the cold air. He dismounted and came to sit beside her, looking at the grass rope with the same expression of wonder he had worn the first time he saw her creation. "I woke up and you were gone," he said. "Figured I would find you out here somewhere." "I was thinking about that day," Olivia said. "About how desperate I was, how alone I felt, how impossible everything seemed." "And now?" Miles asked. Olivia looked at the grass rope in her hands, then at her husband beside her, then at the land around them that they had shaped through years of work and love. "Now I know that the impossible just takes longer and requires help," she said. "That is what you taught me. That is what we built together." Miles took the grass rope from her hands and examined it, turning it over, testing its strength. "You should keep this," he said. "Put it with the original piece we saved. A reminder." "A reminder of what?" "Of where we started," Miles said. "Of what you could do when you had nothing but grass and determination. Of the day I found the woman I would spend my life loving." Olivia felt tears prick her eyes, and she leaned against Miles, letting him hold her as the sun rose over the prairie. They sat there together for a long time, two people who had started with nothing and built everything, watching the day begin. Sarah's wedding in May of 1902 was even larger than James's had been, with people coming from as far as Seattle to attend. Sarah made a beautiful bride, confident and radiant, and Robert looked at her with such clear adoration that Olivia felt her heart would burst with happiness. As she watched her daughter dance with her new husband, Olivia felt Miles's hand slip into hers. "Two down, one to go," he murmured, and Olivia laughed. "Daniel is 10. We have some time before we need to worry about that." But the years had a way of passing quickly. James and Catherine had their first child, a daughter, in 1903, making Miles and Olivia grandparents for the first time. The baby was named Olivia after her grandmother, and holding her tiny namesake, Olivia felt the strange circularity of life, how the struggles of her youth had led to this moment of perfect peace. A new generation beginning with all the advantages that her hard work and Miles's partnership had created. Sarah and Robert's first child, a son, arrived in 1904, and Daniel continued to excel in school, talking about potentially going to college someday, a dream that would have been impossible for his parents' generation but felt achievable for him. The ranch continued to thrive under James's management, with Miles stepping back more and more into an advisory role, content to let his son make decisions and learn from both successes and mistakes. In 1905, Miles and Olivia celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary with a party that felt more like a community celebration than a private event. It seemed like everyone they had ever known came to mark the occasion, bringing stories and memories and toasts to the couple who had become something of an institution in the region. The mayor of Centralia, a young progressive named Thompson, gave a speech about how Miles and Olivia represented the best of frontier values: hard work, ingenuity, partnership, and community spirit. He held up the story of Olivia making rope from prairie grass as an example of the kind of innovative thinking that had built the West. And while Olivia felt embarrassed by the attention, she also felt proud that her moment of desperate improvisation had become a symbol of something larger. That night, after all the guests had left and the ranch was quiet again, Miles and Olivia sat on their porch watching the stars. They had added a proper porch swing years ago, and they sat together on it now, moving gently back and forth, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest. 25 years, Olivia said softly. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like forever. The best 25 years of my life, Miles said firmly. Every day with you has been a gift. Even the hard days, especially the hard days, Miles said, because we faced them together and we came through and we were stronger for it. Olivia tilted her head to look up at him, at the face she knew so well, lined now with age but still handsome to her, still the face of the man who had stopped to help a stranger and ended up sharing his life. I love you, she said, more now than I did on our wedding day, if that is possible. It is possible, Miles said. Love grows if you tend it properly, just like crops or cattle. You have to work at it, care for it, make sure it has what it needs to thrive. He kissed her then, gentle and sweet, a kiss that carried 25 years of history and affection and partnership. When they pulled apart, Olivia rested her head against his shoulder again, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the night sky and listening to the sounds of the prairie. The following years brought continued growth and change. By 1910, James and Catherine had 3 children, Sarah and Robert had 2, and Daniel was preparing to attend the state university, the first member of their family to pursue higher education. Miles was 60 by then, still strong but noticeably slower, content to spend his days working with the horses he loved and playing with his grandchildren. Olivia, at 54, remained active and sharp, still managing aspects of the ranch, and still serving as an informal advisor to younger ranchers struggling with various challenges. She had become something of a local legend, the woman who had made rope from prairie grass, and while she sometimes tired of the story being told and retold, she understood that it meant something to people, represented something about possibility and perseverance that resonated beyond the specific details. In 1912, there was a drought, the worst in 20 years, and many ranchers struggled. Miles and Olivia, drawing on years of experience with water management and crop diversity, weathered it better than most, and they shared their techniques freely with neighbors. Olivia organized a community meeting where experienced ranchers shared drought survival strategies, and her practical, no-nonsense approach helped people feel like the situation was manageable rather than catastrophic. It was during this time that a young woman, recently widowed with 2 small children, came to Olivia asking for advice. Her husband had died in an accident, leaving her with a small claim and no money, and she was considering giving up and moving back east to live with relatives. Olivia listened to her story and saw herself 34 years earlier, alone and desperate, trying to make impossible things work. "What do you have?" Olivia asked. "Right now, what resources do you actually have?" The woman listed them: the land, a small cabin, a few chickens, a milk cow, very little cash. It was not much, but it was not nothing. "Then you start with what you have," Olivia said firmly. "You use what is available, you improvise, you find ways to make do until you can do better. And you ask for help when you need it, because there is no shame in needing help, only in refusing it out of pride." She arranged for the woman to work part-time at the ranch, doing mending and other tasks that could be done while watching her children, paying her fairly and helping her build up savings. She introduced her to other women in the community who could offer advice and support. She showed her, through actions rather than just words, that survival was possible, that building a life from scraps and determination was hard but achievable. 2 years later, that same woman had a thriving egg business and was managing her small claim successfully. And she brought her children to thank Olivia for believing in her when she had not believed in herself. Olivia hugged her and thought about Miles riding up on that long-ago day, about how one person's help at the right moment could change everything. In 1915, the country was changing rapidly. War raged in Europe, though America had not yet joined, and there was a sense that the frontier era was truly ending, that the wild days were giving way to something more settled and civilized. Miles and Olivia, now in their 60s, watched these changes with mixed feelings. They had built their lives in the frontier era, had thrived on its challenges and opportunities, but they also appreciated the stability and prosperity that progress brought. Daniel finished university that year with a degree in agricultural science, and he came home full of ideas about modern farming techniques and scientific approaches to ranching. At first, Miles was skeptical of some of his son's more radical proposals, but Olivia encouraged them to listen, to consider how new knowledge could be combined with traditional methods to create something even better. "We innovated too," she reminded Miles one evening. "We found new ways to do things, new solutions to old problems. Daniel is doing the same thing, just with more formal education behind his thinking." Miles acknowledged she was right, and he worked with Daniel to implement some of his ideas, finding that the combination of Daniel's scientific knowledge and his own practical experience produced excellent results. The ranch continued to adapt, to evolve, staying prosperous while many other operations struggled with changing times. By 1918, when the war finally ended and America celebrated, Miles and Olivia had 7 grandchildren, ranging from teenagers to infants. Their children were all successfully established in their own lives. James running the ranch with Catherine, Sarah working alongside Robert at the bank which he now managed, Daniel applying his education to consulting work that helped modernize agriculture throughout the region. The ranch that had started with Olivia's homestead claim and Henderson's gift of adjacent land now covered several thousand acres, employed over a dozen people full-time, and was known throughout Washington as one of the best managed operations in the state. But more than the material success, Miles and Olivia had built a legacy of integrity, innovation, and community service that their children were carrying forward. On their 40th wedding anniversary in 1919, the celebration was enormous, a 3-day event that drew people from across the state. The governor sent a letter of congratulations. The local newspaper ran a feature article about their partnership and success. But the moment Olivia treasured most was a quiet one, late on the second night of celebration, when all 7 grandchildren gathered around while Miles told the story of finding their grandmother on the prairie, making rope from grass, determined to solve her problem with whatever materials were at hand. The children had heard the story before, but they listened with rapt attention, and the oldest, young Olivia, who was now 16, said, "Grandma, do you still have that rope?" "The original one." "I do," Olivia said. She went inside and retrieved the box where she kept 2 pieces of grass rope, the original fragment they had saved from her first attempt in 1878, now brittle and faded, and the piece she had made that morning in 1902, somewhat fresher but still aged. She showed them to her grandchildren, passing the box around carefully. "That does not look like much," one of the younger children observed. "No," Olivia agreed, "it does not, but that rope represented possibility when I had nothing else. It represented the idea that I could solve my own problems, that I did not have to accept defeat just because circumstances were difficult. And it brought your grandfather into my life, which means it brought all of you into being." She looked at Miles as she said this, and he smiled at her, that warm, loving smile that still made her heart flutter even after 40 years. They had built so much from so little, and every bit of it had been worth the struggle. The 1920s brought prosperity and challenges in equal measure. The ranch adapted to new technologies, purchasing its first truck in 1921, installing electricity in 1923, modernizing in ways that would have been unimaginable when Miles and Olivia started. But the core values remained unchanged: hard work, fair dealing, innovation within tradition, and always helping neighbors when help was needed. Miles's health began to decline slowly in his late 60s. Nothing dramatic, but a gradual slowing, a weariness that no amount of rest seemed to fully cure. He still rode most days, still worked with the horses he loved, but Olivia saw the effort it took, saw him aging in a way that frightened her even though she knew it was natural, inevitable. They talked about it one evening in 1925, sitting on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. Miles was 65, Olivia was 69, and they both felt the weight of years. "I am not ready to leave you," Miles said quietly. "There is still so much I want to do, so many more days I want to spend with you." Olivia took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his in a gesture so familiar it was automatic. "Then we will have those days," she said firmly. "As many as we are given, and we will make the most of each one." And they did. For another 7 years they had those days. Miles moved more slowly, worked less, but the love between them never diminished. If anything, it deepened, became richer as they recognized the preciousness of time. They spent long hours talking, remembering, laughing over old stories and marveling at how their improbable partnership had created such abundance. Miles Northwood died peacefully in his sleep in March of 1932, at the age of 72, with Olivia beside him holding his hand. His last words to her, spoken the evening before, were, "Thank you for letting me love you." The funeral was massive, attended by hundreds of people whose lives Miles had touched. His children and grandchildren spoke, sharing memories and lessons, painting a picture of a man who had been strong but gentle, determined but fair, who had built his life on partnership and integrity. Olivia sat in the front row, dry-eyed and dignified, and listened to them describe the man she had loved for more than 50 years. Afterward, she returned to the ranch house that felt enormous and empty without him. She stood in their bedroom, looking at the box that held the grass rope, and she allowed herself to cry then, deep, wrenching sobs for everything they had built together and everything she would now face alone. But Olivia had learned long ago that she was stronger than she knew, that she could survive difficult things, that life continued even after devastating loss. She let herself grieve, took the time she needed, and then slowly began to rebuild her life around the shape of his absence. Her children surrounded her with love and support, and her grandchildren, now ranging from young adults to teenagers, made sure she was never alone for long unless she chose to be. The ranch continued under James's management, still thriving, still employing people and contributing to the community. Olivia remained involved to the extent she wanted, offering advice when asked but mostly content to watch the younger generation carry things forward. She lived another 15 years after Miles's death, passing away peacefully in 1947 at the age of 91. Her obituary in the newspaper called her a pioneer, an innovator, a pillar of the community. But the line that would have meant the most to her was the one that described her as the beloved wife of Miles Northwood, partner in building one of the state's most respected ranches. They buried her next to Miles on the hill behind the ranch house, the same hill where her father was buried, the same hill where she had stood so many times watching the sun rise and set over the prairie. The funeral drew crowds even larger than Miles's had, testament to the respect and affection she had earned over a long, productive life. But perhaps the most fitting tribute came from her oldest grandchild, also named Olivia, who had become a teacher and historian. She had spent years collecting stories about her grandparents, documenting their lives and the community they had helped build. At the funeral, she held up a carefully preserved piece of grass rope, protected now in a sealed display case. "My grandmother made this from prairie grass when she had no money to buy proper rope," young Olivia said to the assembled crowd. "My grandfather saw what she had done and was amazed. That moment of amazement led to love, to partnership, to everything we are celebrating today. This rope is not just grass twisted together. It is a symbol of what is possible when we refuse to give up, when we use what we have instead of mourning what we lack, and when we are open to connection with other people who can see our strength and value." She paused, looking at the grass rope in its case, then at the two graves side by side. They built an incredible life together. They built it from determination and love and mutual respect. They built it from prairie grass and amazement. And they left us a legacy of knowing that we, too, can build something beautiful from whatever materials we have at hand, as long as we are willing to work hard and let ourselves be helped. The words carried across the prairie, across the land that Olivia and Miles had shaped through decades of work, across the fields and pastures that fed 3 generations of their family. The grass still grew, tough and resilient, bending in the wind but never breaking, just as it had when a young woman with nothing but determination had twisted it into rope and changed the course of her life forever. And in the years that followed, the story continued to be told and retold. The woman who made rope from prairie grass and the cowboy who was amazed. 2 people who found each other at just the right moment and built something lasting from improvisation and love. Their great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren heard the story, learned the lessons, and carried forward the values of resourcefulness and partnership that had defined Olivia and Miles's remarkable life together. The ranch still stood, still thrived, managed now by the 4th generation. But those who worked it never forgot the foundation on which it was built. One woman's refusal to accept defeat, one man's wonder at her ingenuity, and the love that grew between them, as strong and enduring as the grass itself, woven together into something that could bear the weight of a lifetime and beyond.